Adriana. It's a honor and a pleasure to be here. Thank you and University of Oklahoma Business School for organizing this. So I'm going to address international enforcement networks to combat new fraud typologies. Okay. So what as normally happens during pandemics or other problems in the world, organized crime and criminals are quick to take advantage. International government networks have arisen partly out of the emergence of a world politics paradigm that sees transnational relations as transcending the nation state and includes transnational actors such as NGOs. And essentially, my presentation looks at the different international organizations and how they've done this government networks. So these networks expand regulatory and enforcement network, and they enable national government officials to keep pace with all the other actors, especially criminals. And so let's look then at the different roles that some of the groups, such as the Egmont Group, Iasco, FATF, and Interpol have played. The next section we'll look at, the next section will look at the preventive measures, and then I'll look at the what I call responsive measures that have been taken by international organizations. And to some extent, it's a little bit of an overlap between what's preventive and what's responsive. So we'll hear a lot about new fraud typologies, and because I only have 15 minutes, I'm not going to dwell on them, but we know that there's all kinds of new cyber threats. We know that there's a lot of efforts to sell fraudulent and counterfeit trade, especially among pharmaceutical products and PPE. And we know that there's a lot of effort to target people that are already on reduced income. So let's look at some of the preventive actions then. First, looking at the Egmont Group. The Egmont Group is a body of financial intelligence units. And what happened is in the late 80s, or really even in the 90s, these some of the governments started forming financial intelligence units, which are really part of the anti-money laundering, counterterrorism, financial regulatory and enforcement efforts. And as part of the 40 recommendations of the Financial Action Task Force, one of the recommendations says that each country should establish a financial intelligence unit, also known by its abbreviation as FIU, in order to implement anti-money laundering policy. And so recently, on April 22nd of this year, Egmont announced that it had started a center of FIU excellence and leadership, and that group is starting an emerging risks course. So that course is based on the findings, the research findings of the different typologies, challenges, and recommendations. And the goals of ECOFEL are to share its expertise and best practice among FIUs, and also to develop networks so that the Egmont Group can better coordinate with FATF, with Iasco, and the other international regulators, so that they position themselves both domestically, regionally, and internationally as leaders. So then another group that's doing preventive action is Iasco, the International Organization of Securities Commission, which brings together all the different national security regulators around the world, and it develops global standards on all kinds of regulatory matters such as international cooperation in terms of security regulation investigations. And it also works intensively with other groups like the G20, the Financial Stability Board, on its standards and policies. So, and securities regulators are focused on the operational and financial resilience of market infrastructure and the operational capability of market users. It also has been developing appropriate regulatory flexibility to help market participants address the challenges posed by the coronavirus. And we know that to a large extent, at least in this country, it has been successful. And what's happening is the Iasco board and the regional committees are hosting regular calls to share information and coordinate responses and act to address issues arising from COVID-19. So Iasco has various regional committees all around the world. There's a Latin American committee, for instance. There's a Caribbean Iasco committee, and they work hand in hand with the national regulators. Iasco is also coordinating closely with other standard bodies, standard setting bodies, which include the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision, the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructures, the International Association of Insurance Supervisors, and the Financial Stability Board. So all of them are dealing to ensure adequate liquidity and funding options. One of the things that they're doing is paying attention to the educational materials and the standards that have been set by the International Accounting Standards Board to address the problems of new credit risks and liquidity issues that have arisen, especially with respect to the relief that has been given by national governments to the various market players. So that results in needs to evaluate properly significant increase in credit risks. Okay, so let's now turn to the Financial Action Task Force, which many people, as many of you know, was created in 1989, arising out of one of the G7 meetings. It's really called the Financial Action Task Force on Anti-Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing. And in May, on May 4th, it published a report on COVID-19 related money laundering and terrorist financing risks. And so it looked at, among the new threats and vulnerabilities, increased fraud, such as fundraising for fake charities, impersonation of officials, and all kinds of cybercrime, which you'll hear later in the program, more details on that. It also looked at the need to adjust anti-money laundering in COVID-19. So for instance, supervision, FATF has said supervision must go on just as before, but now some of it is going to be more remote, and there won't be as many in-person audits of the regulated community. It's also called for regulation and policy reforms, such as using fintech and regtech more. And let's look at some of the policy responses that it's called for. It includes better coordination domestically. So groups like, in this country, FinCEN, Homeland Security, FBI, have to coordinate better. But also there has to be better communication with the private sector, with banks, with currency exchange people, and there has to be full use of risk-based approach to customer due diligence. Countries have to support electronic and digital payment options, especially so that there will be inclusion of all the public in being able to use the financial system. And also there has to be more attention to understanding the new risks and adopting operational approaches. So FATF's next steps will be to continue to monitor these typologies and the vulnerabilities, and they're going to continue providing reports and to monitor the typologies. So what about Interpol? Interpol, of course, is an international police organization, and on April 4th, Interpol warned that cyber criminals are targeting critical healthcare institutions and ransomware, and it issued a cybercrime threat response. And its report you can see on its website. It's working closely with private partners in the cybersecurity industry, especially to support organizations like health organizations and hospitals that have been targeted by ransomware. So its global threat assessment identifies the challenges facing police across different regions, as well as best practices and measures to mitigate the effects of COVID-19. It also talks about using innovative technologies such as drones, biometrics, and artificial intelligence. So let's now turn to responsive actions. And I only have a couple of minutes, so I'm just going to look at the European Union Agency for Criminal Justice Cooperation, which is also called Eurojust. So essentially, each EU country sends to the rest of the EU its investigative prosecutors and magistrates, and they're housed together so that when there's a need for cross-border cooperation, Eurojust can jump into action and help in terms of freezing accounts or obtaining search warrants or extradition warrants. And it cooperates closely with the European Public Prosecutor's Office and with OLAF, which is the anti-fraud organization. And so there have been 3 cases that I've mentioned where governments have been tricked into making payments for PPE or for pharma products, which have been hoaxes. And because Eurojust, in one case involving Germany, and one case involved both Germany and Holland, Eurojust enabled the authorities to quickly freeze the money that the governments had paid. A second case involves France and a Hungarian entity which supposedly was selling protective masks, but that was also a hoax. And quickly, with cooperation, they froze the money that had been paid to a Hungarian bank account. In the Czech Republic, a hospital had to close because its computer system was hacked, and Eurojust helped to issue European investigation orders and mutual assistance requests for the ongoing investigations. So let me now conclude. So as the coronavirus pandemic evolves, international government organizations are going to need to adjust, and they're going to continue to create these private-public networks so that national regulators and enforcement agencies can work together with businesses and civil society, both in anticipating and preventing frauds, and also being able to quickly respond to frauds so that they can investigate and prosecute cross-border criminals and seize their proceeds before they vanish. And network actors will relate to each other through the various regulatory, judicial, and legislative channels, as well as informal conferences, meetings, and online groups. And with that, I want to thank again the hosts for enabling me to participate, and I look forward to listening to the other participants and to the dialogue. Thank you once again.